Mastodon, Pteradactyl, Triceratops, Saber-Tooth Tiger, and Tyrannosaurus. Oh yes, they're back, or rather he is, as the original Megazord, or Dino Megazord as we colloquially know it, has made it out again in time for Power Rangers' 29th anniversary. But is Hasbro's first collector's combiner for the Zord Ascension project a hit, or is this take more of a Zord descension for the Mighty Morphin icon? Let's unpack this thing, starting as ever with the toy history. Hasbro's new Zord Ascension project line is a spin-off extension from the Lightning Collection and aims to deliver high poseability versions of the series' famous robots. Announcement for it came about 7 months before release, back in December 2021, through to the first shipping of it in late July 2022. We've been waiting for Hasbro to show us what they can do with a higher price point Megazord. They've been continuing to impress with their spotty Megazord releases in their Dino Fury mainline, but this is obviously targeted at a different crowd. It comes a full 30 years on from this thing's world debut in Japan as Daijujin, and a decade after Bandai USA's first collector-grade Megazord, half a decade after Bandai's Mini-Pla, as well as what I still consider to be the ultimate version of this robot from Bandai and Tamashii Nation's Soul of Chogokin series, and 2 years removed since Hasbro's first combining version of Megazord. So how has the Dino Megazord evolved this time? Well, how about in terms of price? At an eye-watering £161.99 on Hasbro Pulse UK, this is capital not cheap. But actually I'm disappointed to say that the in-hand feeling of the toy does not communicate the gravitas of this high item price whatsoever. This is both the tallest and puzzlingly lightest version of the 4 combining Megazord versions that I own. It's also the second most expensive. I got mine for £130, which is a scary 116% more than my 2013 Legacy Megazord, though still only about 56% less than I paid for my Soul of Chogokin. So its place in the middle of this price lineup kind of tells you where you should be setting your expectations here. It's Hasbro's most expensive Megazord release yet, but it's also their first aimed at the collector's market, with 15 plus adorned on the box, just like those recent Bandai examples had. You can imagine they were feeling the pressure to get this right and land a home run when Bandai struggled with it 20 years deep. With some versions released quite quietly without fanfare in the 2 years leading up to this, we've already had 5 takes on Megazord by Hasbro. We've had their Mega Mighty's Playschool line version, their 10-inch through their budget retailer action figure line, cheap combiner version, available as 3 separate Zord packs or in a limited release Amazon exclusive box set. That was smaller scale and less paint than here, but less price too. We've had a 7-inch action figure with the black and gold version not far behind it, in scale with the Lightning Collection monsters, and now ZAP, and another black and gold version on the way for those that bought an NFT. Good for you, whoever you are. If you remember, Hasbro had the original Megazord suit at their Power Rangers booth on their initial Toy Fair appearance, and I said in my rundown of the Megazord version history up until that point that they'd probably use it to scan for future toys. Well, they totally must have, because they've definitely been getting their use out of the toy ever since. It should be said I've not bought all of the combining versions, but I have bought most. I didn't want the Mini-Pla because I don't buy that scale, and I didn't want Hasbro's 2020 combining version because it didn't look at all impressive. But you stick Lightning Collection on the name and I can't not look. Onto the design. So normally in this section I talk about what the Zords and Megazords are based on or take design cues from. I think this one's quite obvious and it's well trodden ground by now, but for those that need it, dinosaur assault vehicles. That's your theme, the OG. We overlook now just how much Saban struck gold with this concept back in 1993, Jurassic Park was popular, and Super Sentai from previous years didn't have Megazords as good as this. The year before saw Jetman's mecha, and that still looked more 80s than 90s. Zyuranger was radical, which was what Power Rangers needed to break through to the Western audience. They come together into a dinosaur tank, which this one can recreate quite well. Then finally they stand up again and become a 3-horned warrior with a sword and shield. It's the classic image of this franchise really, a pop culture stalwart that up top sells the idea of this being a robot, but down below reveals that every element is actually transformed from something more animalistic that serves another purpose somewhere else. It's successful because it's fun, just the right amount of challenging, and compared to modern era versions, brimming with details and patterns that make it stand out. Now, I've never done this before, but what I normally talk about for the rest of the video are so tightly linked that I'm going to combine these next 3 sections. Like my friend Bevan said, it's just like when Power Ranger Zords come together anyway. Because on this version of Megazord, more than ever before, every yin has a yang, every heads has a tails, and every plus has a minus. So here's what's good and bad about the differences from the originals. Now, I'm approaching this from the perspective of having got the Deluxe Original, the Legacy, the Soul of Chogokin, and now the Zord Ascension project versions. I think what's impressive about this is the box and the decision to concentrate on the Megazord's face, or head. I can tell you that Bandai never made their packaging heavier than the actual item inside, but here, the empty box is easily 2 or 3 times the weight of the Megazord. Don't get me wrong, I love a sturdy box, even with a lightweight slipcover sleeve that's definitely going to tear and crease, but I hate a light feeling toy. Bandai knew this, and that's why their 2013 and 2017 versions added all the metal bells and whistles to bulk out the thing, to make them seem even more premium, to kind of justify the price. They probably did it as a mistake to start with, as they were taking a 2010 design and trying to work out a way to charge double for it, but they succeeded. They made the thing worth its weight. Here though, you've got a toy that costs double that again, and yet you are left feeling a bit deflated by the lightness of it. Not to mention, to start, I can tell you that the plastic-free packaging's ripped paper baggy solution for protecting the toys makes you feel like you're opening Happy Meal toys in the 90s rather than this great new collector grade series. Boxes aren't something I go into detail about normally. When it works well, you don't notice it. Soul of Chogokin's box had it down. It had plastics for the Zords and a polystyrene molded tray which was very high quality and presented the Zords in the same layout as the original release. And there was a clear plastic protective lid sheet. I love that style of packaging. It felt nostalgic and so complete and protective. I leave my Soul of Chogokin in that box when I'm not using it for something like this channel, and I know that it's well protected and the best place for them. I didn't talk about it at the time because it wasn't a big factor in the use of the toy, but it is a big factor in the longevity of the toy, and so you can't help but be disappointed by the new Zord Ascension project box when it functions so poorly. When SOC managed to be both nostalgic and improved on the original, with Zord Ascension project, it is nostalgic with the cockpit console cardboard covers. Less so for me with the comic style artwork inside the lid, and the box being 2 hard duty pieces is great, but the way the Zords and pieces don't really have properly defined spaces in there means it doesn't improve on what we've had before. They've done what they can without plastic, but I'm going to need to get some plastic baggies for these tiny Rangers because they're not going to fare well with this arrangement. They're going to get lost at some point. I wish there was a molded storage tray for the Zords. I don't know why they couldn't do that. I don't enjoy the moves Hasbro are making in this area. It's cheapening the feel of them while they're putting prices up. Maybe I'm an old man yelling at clouds at this point, but I bet a lot of the target audience for this thing are as well. Onto the toy then. Well, firstly, it's big. It towers over all the past combiners so far in the Zord Ascension line's brand new 1 to 144 scale. The only version that's going to best it is that magazine partwork one, whenever people have however many 100 issues it takes to get all the pieces for it. And that's really just a glorified Soul of Chogokin with LED eyes anyway. So we're in a scale that unfortunately doesn't match up with any of your 3 decades of past purchases from Bandai. And that's why you're going to want to get this toy if you plan to continue buying into the line, because your next ZAP Megazord is going to make your older Dino Megazord look out of scale and way too short. It's a clever, evil business practice there, and a move we're familiar with from when the Lightning Collection main action figures changed scale to 6-inch. This doesn't even fit in with the existing Dino Fury Megazords. Actually, it's about the same height as Beast Morpher's Beast X Megazord, if that gives you an idea of where we are. The thing has legs for days, they do look way too long. They say this is a to scale Megazord with the show, but it just can't be when the legs take up 3/4 of the whole robot. However, making them this long means the body carriage of both Saber-Tooth and Triceratops can be both quite narrow and look proportionally right as Zords. Another design choice we can't get away from are the spangly details in the Pteradactyl chest pattern and the Mastodon shoulder pads. These are definitely different. The Pteradactyl now has a sort of mesh effect across it. I'm not sure where they got the idea for that from, but it would have looked better without it. Mastodon has translucent red and yellow plastic shoulder emblems, which actually clash with the versions seen in Zord mode. So basically on the reverse side of the arms, you have versions which match the forearm yellow paint, rather than being a different kind of plastic that's sort of different for different sake. I wonder if anyone has managed to detach the shoulder pad pieces and flip them round, because then you would actually have the painted side showing in Megazord mode, which looks a lot more familiar to me. I think this is meant to show it as more robotic and mechanical. Obviously it was more effort for them to make this change, but did it need it? I still think Soul of Chogokin gave us the best shoulder emblems ever. The cynic within wonders if they were so worried about the factory messing up the paint apps on the shoulders that they cast most of it in plastic to hide any mishaps. That's how burnt I am by Lightning Collection stuff. And on that defects note, let me quickly complain about my personal version. Your mileage may vary with these faults though. It's floppy where it shouldn't be. The leg joint that connects the Triceratops is the worst. Speaking of Triceratops, what's up with the sloppy silver paint on mine and the split head crown piece? I don't know what that's called on a Triceratops, sorry. It has a little gap in it where the plastic hasn't formed together evenly. Pteradactyl can't hold her head up, and the newly jointed tailpiece, which is actually for the Megazord mode rather than Zord mode, is also floppy and makes the Zord feel like a ragdoll or string puppet. Something that I can explicitly say is good about this toy is that it's the most action figure-like combining Megazord ever. Dino Fury has given us some Megazords which look good and pose well. That's kind of been Hasbro's mantra with their Megazord releases so far. Even the 2020 basic combined version of Megazord included elbow articulation. But here it's taken even further. It can sit down. We've never had a combining Megazord that could do that before. Props to Hasbro for absorbing the toy history of this Zord, because while it takes definite inspiration from the best parts of Soul of Chogokin, it also resolves some of the shortcomings of it. As such, I'd say Zord Ascension project is a product of everything that came before. It picks and chooses which innovations to keep from the rich tapestry of releases of this Megazord. You could argue that the SoC was over-engineered. It had a point in doing this though, as it was to maintain the look of each Zord mode by hiding away any trace of the combination to come. But Hasbro found some of these bits were overkill and they could actually do without them for their version. In a way it's helpful though, because it means there's less steps involved in the transformation and less fiddly bits involved that kind of slow down the fun of it. So let's consider this Zord by Zord, going in the Ranger's typical order. Mastodon is one of the least changed Zords from throughout the various releases. It usually looks how it looks, and articulation in Zord mode has never really been too generous. Here it's the usual non-existent. Interestingly, they've made the decision to freeze the trunk in place, just like on the Legacy. Very surprised that doesn't move. It means that Mastodon has zero poseability in Zord mode, which has been par for the course really. Oh, and the head is back to black for those keeping score. It does tend to go between that and grey. From Mastodon's Soul of Chogokin equivalent, the shield clips don't need to fold in, but the handle can fold out, as it has continued to on every shield up to this point. They clearly like the SoC introduced arm covers for Zord mode, but they didn't make them foldable here, so they must be detached when you get into the combination. They gave them a strange storage place on the bottom of the Megazord mode's feet, nowhere for them to go in tank mode. I'm not sure about these. Are they there as stabilizers? It's an interesting choice. As soon as they're off, I'm always left wondering, what do I do with these now? It's the same problem with these swappable hands. You don't have to use them if not wanted at least. Yeah, because unlike the Soul of Chogokin, this thing's hands and thumbs don't move. It's the same in Zord mode, you can do without it, and it functions more like the OG and Legacy versions. We've also kept the better poseability in the arms. The options are boundless with a shoulder pivot, both a bicep and forearm swivel, and hand twist. Unlike SOC, the hands don't open and the thumbs don't move, but you do, like with Lightning Collection action figures, get alternate open hands which pop on and off very easily but stay on well. The grip for the sword is a little snug, a little too snug, as like my original Legacy Megazord Power Sword, the paint is already chipping off. Oh, the Power Sword also copies the SOC version, which introduced black and gold paint to it for the first time. Hasbro clearly liked that too. I personally found the Soul of Chogokin blaster guns to be too loose and detach too easily. Here you won't have that problem. Those require a lot of force to get them on their back pegs, and once they're in, they stay in place. A brand new play feature for Lightning Collection is that they made it so the Mastodon feet on the back of the Megazord can tip upwards, which means the blasters can shoot forwards. I do think the Megazord head is a bit too high as it clashes against the horns, however, it's a good idea. So it's actually surprising Hasbro were the first ones to have it, but there you go. Anyway, big point there for effort. Pteradactyl is a necessary piece to complete the look of the Megazord, though as a Zord, it's always been the most middling of the 5 Dinozords, and only really came into its own during its Soul of Chogokin version. While they've kept the nice sharp angle of the head and extended wings, the original 2 had really shallow wings that met in the middle, whereas now they overlap. They fortunately kept the white and pink interior as introduced by the SOC after Legacy gutted it and left it completely grey. Those famous jet engine clips that I did like don't exist now, as the clips for combination are more usefully placed on the underside of the wings. I actually really like that as a solution and can't believe Bandai never thought of it before. Yeah, Hasbro can take another win for that idea. The tank mode Pterodactyl clips are much more user friendly. One of my complaints about SOC tank mode was how difficult it was. You had to fold out some rubber ports on the Mastodon feet and then friction them into the Pterodactyl. This is probably the better way to do it, though you do sacrifice a bit of screen accuracy in Megazord mode, as now there's clips that are on view on the chest plate, but still quite minor, very easy to overlook. Triceratops has always been a so-so Zord and got downgraded significantly with the Legacy, where it lost its wheels. It's supposed to be a tank, you'd think they'd keep wheels. Anyway, neither Soul of Chogokin nor this gave those wheels back. They're long gone from this and the Saber-Tooth at this point. But one big innovation, which made it a more screen accurate version again, was adding the tracks, which extended out the sides of the Zord. While the wheels don't pop down like on SOC, and you don't get the tusk chain itself pretty extra, even in SOC, it is great that they've incorporated what was the best innovation introduced by Soul of Chogokin, and really works to fill out this sword and make it feel unique, rather than just like a leg. Saber-Tooth Tiger is probably the second best dinosaur after the T-Rex, in that its 4 legs always meant it had a bit more poseability. The front claws don't flex like we got on SOC, but the legs do articulate nicely for posing, so you can get more out of it than either the Legacy or original versions. Its battle cannon doesn't extend, but arguably it doesn't need to. And same for both the 2-leg Zords, the mouths on both yellow and blue Zords open. They also kept flexible joints in the front ends, which give them a bit more posability for Zord mode and to move the feet in Megazord mode. Speaking of, they didn't do clips that fold over the Zord ports this time, but they're so out of sight that it doesn't matter. And actually you get better range of motion with knee bend without those pieces blocking it. They also, as introduced in SOC, managed to make the artillery weapons poseable rather than floppy like we've had in the past, another good development to stick with. The Tyrannosaurus Rex always has a lot of pressure on it. As the common flagship Red Ranger Zord of the series, you definitely want this version to be better than, say, the Legacy. SOC definitely set the high bar for this. The head looks a bit strange this time in shape and eyes, and the tail clips are not concealable like they were for the SOC, but that's not to say all the premium innovations have been ignored. The new poseable knees are here, as well as some axis of motion rotation in the arms, which, while shorter than SOC and with no articulation in the claws, they've sort of solved it by moulding them in the perfect 3-claw position. Definitely the most screen accurate pose of these. The T-Rex head can be pivoted up higher and the mouth can be opened significantly wider than SOC. You still see the Megazord horn and face sticking out of it, but it's decent. They also copied SOC's cannon in the mouth and they kept it silver. One more thing about tank mode, with SOC they made an elegant folding panel which the shield clipped to. It definitely had that aura of being over-engineered again, but it was a nice touch. Here we're back to the original style of hole-in sternum version, and you just plonk the shield peg in there. It's absolutely fine, to be honest, not even something we would have noticed if SOC hadn't spoilt us, and they've tried to make the hole as small as possible. They kept the hip emblems as separate pieces that can pivot. This was never a thing until Soul of Chogokin. Before that they were moulded onto the T-Rex thigh. Now they're not only separate pieces, but they're only held on with the smallest friction pegs, and if you do enough leg posing, they detach and they go flying. I'm surprised I haven't lost one of mine yet, and this has been quite frustrating and disappointing. One of the hard-gotten gains from SOC was being able to pose the Megazord in a twisted waist position, but there was a catch, as you had to detach the T-Rex tail and have it just dangling back there. Hasbro have copied that, and they've actually created a fix to enable it this time. We're meant to detach the tail completely, and there's a gap where it clips onto the Mastodon, clearing room for you to rotate it with ease and without a second thought. Luckily you don't have to do this if you don't like it, but the clips don't line up if you keep it as one piece, so it will just be resting there. Oh, and about that 2-part tail, I think they got their measurements off, because surely the bottom is supposed to be flush with the tailbone section, so that when you twist it, it shouldn't be getting pushed away from the Megazord, it should skim over the top of it. So yeah, a point deduction for that, which seems like a really dumb mistake to have made when the point was concentrated on enabling the waist swivel in the first place. And a brand new innovation, definitely inspired by the Lightning Collection action figures, an ab crunch. This, tied with the movement in the pterodactyl tail, means you can bend him forwards or backwards, and you can really see the difference in how wide that gap between the T-Rex tail segments becomes. So he can crunch forwards while looking up more. Very cool and unexpected. One thing I do like more about ZAP than SOC is that the T-Rex's arms aren't as prominent in Megazord mode. They're really quite distracting on Soul of Chogokin, whereas they're much less obvious in Zord Ascension. However, they giveth and they taketh away, as the Megazord's eyes are more sunken, dull, and overall just less prominent. My Megazord face is painted quite badly. Those eyes really sparkled on the SOC, metaphorically speaking. The face and the paint detail was best ever on that. As it is, all of the black and white decals that you want are there in ZAP, if sloppy and a bit fuzzy. There's definitely a lot more motion here. The Megazord head is itself on a ball joint. You may remember I complained about that back when the SOC released, that you could get him in these dynamic poses but couldn't get his eye level to correlate with how he was stood. You have oodles of movement with this version. You can even get him looking a bit sarcastic if you want. Body language on a Megazord. How's that for progress? Bandai's 2010 and subsequent Legacy version made leg ports the new way of doing the combination, and Soul of Chogokin doubled down on it and made them concealed. Hasbro 2020 release followed the ports in the way, but their 2022 version copies the Soul of Chogokin's hide them out of the way. Let me just say the best method was still the original. It matched what we saw on screen and actually made use of these circular kind of knee joints in a logical and fun way. I do think they should have used the original spring-loaded leg method rather than this new trend of pegs, but maybe they weren't comfortable that they could achieve that. I think SOC probably didn't do it because of the weight of the die-cast Zords, but I think the only reason Hasbro haven't done it is because SOC didn't. Legacy Megazord's great weakness was falling forwards. The weight of the arms and the rotating leg ports which couldn't lock were its literal downfall, which the SOC and now ZAP have taken steps to mitigate against. Having said that, I've noticed if you raise the Megazord's arms and then try push them down again, the force does push the knees out, so it does bend forwards after all. Overall, this is definitely the most interesting Megazord in a while. Something that is kind of a major part of Power Rangers that we've never had considered before is of the Rangers being the drivers or pilots of these things. In ZAP Megazord, there's not one, not two, but three representations of the 5 Rangers, as separate pieces that come in the accessories pack, in their Zord cockpits as moulded in detail, no they can't be removed, and in the Megazord head as a embossed printed piece. Impressively, these are all in scale with each other, and I think it's to do with ZAP's obsession with their 1:144 scale and showing off how humans correlate in size terms to these giant robots. I think it's a nice, unique idea we've not seen before for our original Megazord. We had something of that ilk with the second season's Thunder Megazord original toy in 94 or 95, or even 93 if you had the Super Sentai Dyrano version, depending on where you were in the world or if you were even born. But yeah, my thoughts on it are mixed, like with a lot of the ZAP choices. The cockpit and separate piece ones really need some paint detail, but as it is, they're too small to apply in any accurate way. The cockpit ones are in there so tightly you wouldn't be able to get a brush in there accurately without painting the entire cockpit. The Rangers in the Megazord helmet, strange that they swapped from moulded detail to a print, but it is a great detail and it actually kind of reminds me of what Super 7s are doing, but they incorrectly put them in the chest for aesthetic reasons. And this kind of makes you understand why, because it's a very small printed graphic. It also kind of makes me worry a bit about losing Megazord's faceplate, but to be honest, it does grip on quite nicely, and at least being able to remove it gives me the option to be able to tidy up some of those really sloppy paint apps, though there's nothing I can do about the bobbly mouthguard. It does seem that at least with the Dragon Zord, this trend is going to continue of having tiny, I'm not going to say figures, statuettes or representative impressions of the Rangers for scale purposes. A bit like the effect pieces that come with Lightning Collection figures, I think you can either take it or you can leave it with these. You can choose to ignore them, there's no need to reveal them if you don't want to, and thankfully the hinges on the Zord cockpit hatches are completely concealed anyway. To conclude then, I think we must consider what it is versus what it isn't. I think my initial disappointment about this thing largely came from being burnt out by the original Megazord and also being spoilt by Megazords of the recent past. That's not to say that this one doesn't spoil you in some ways, but just maybe the overall feel leaves you wanting more. Hasbro's trend with Power Rangers thus far has been to go in with something impressive and then steeply and quickly put the price up. But I'm not convinced they can get away with this line. They're playing their winning hand as far as mass market appeal goes, pushing out Megazord and Dragonzord in the same calendar year. But in terms of what else they can do, I need better quality plastic, a better box solution, perhaps a cardboard molded insert like Bandai did for legacy releases, and the price to remain the same but not inflate any further. Because this was not worth what I paid for it. I think around maybe £80, £90 would have been right for this. To go for £130 and be priced at £160, I'm just not as convinced as I want it to be. For most people, the old releases are just unattainable now, priced out of the water in resale value. I guess that's how Hasbro arrived at the price they did with this. Who knows, maybe one day this will go for lots more than list price too. The weight of the box will at least confer it to be substantial, even if the toy inside will not. Yes, Hasbro's Lightning Collection Zord Ascension project MZ-0101 is a sensory feast in some ways, but its lack of heft and cheap quality plastic makes it less impressive than recent equivalents. Having said that, you will have fun with this toy, and surely that's the point. One of my biggest fears with Soul of Chogokin was, and remains, damaging it in any way. It feels more like an ornament rather than a toy. Legacy feels like an ornament too, but mostly because it's so limited in what you can do with it. I think Zord Ascension project sets an interesting new flag in the ground that has listened to our criticism of Megazord's past, that articulation was missing, that diecast was too heavy, that SOC was too pricey. Hasbro have made a great attempt here, and while I'm sure it won't be their last combining version of Megazord ever, it is the current one, and I bet we'll have this for at least 5 or 10 years before they revisit a collector's version, not counting any new versions that may or may not appear as part of a new continuity. But as a marker to tie in with the 30th anniversary season, this is a release I can cautiously recommend. Just know what you're getting yourself in for, and maybe wait for a sale. But don't wait too long because the aftermarket can be fierce. Part of this thing's success is surely down to there having been such a rich back catalogue of releases to draw from. Like I've just gone into laborious detail over, they've definitely borrowed or been inspired by the bits that work best with the most expensive version of the Megazord and brought it down into a mid-range budget version. What worries me for future ZAP releases is that there ain't that much to draw on for other Megazords, because Dino Megazord is the one that gets frequent new versions. I strongly expect we'll see something where there's, in the very least, a mini-pla version out there. Where there's Megazords though which have only ever seen the original Bandai version, I'm thinking Ninja Storm, Dino Thunder, I don't think they'd be able to innovate from that as much as they'll only be drawing from the Soul combining version that ever released. So I'd wager we're more likely to see a Thunder, Ninja, Shogun or Astro Megazord next than we are a Zeo or Turbo Megazord. That's not to say they're never coming though. If Hasbro hit their stride with these, they'll hopefully have a series of check marks to hit each time, elbow and head articulation being easy examples. But it's the stuff that advances Zord mode, the covers for the Mastodon arms, the tracks that pull out for Triceratops, which are less likely to be thought up on the fly by Hasbro without an inspiring design to go off, basically someone else's homework to copy against. We'll see though, that's just me speculating the way I do. Articulation, after all, is better than Soul of Chogokin's and definitely gets an A+. I can't believe what they've managed here. All in all, the design functionality gets an A-. It could have been higher, but it loses out from the T-Rex tail getting pushed out by the waist swivel and the Mastodon covers only being detachable pieces rather than folding up. But design decals and finish gets a B-. There's been really great observation of the paint that needed to be there, but liberties taken in the Pteradactyl and Mastodon which stand out, and I think cheapen the look. This is certainly a toy made for the Instagram era. There's a plug to go and follow me at PowerRangergram. It looks impressive for sure. It can achieve poses that none of the others cheaper than this ever could, and even bests the Soul of Chogokin at a few. But is poseability all we're looking for in a collector's toy? Or did Bandai have it right? Is heft the way to go when they're asking for so much more money? It's a difficult question, one I'd love to get your thoughts on in the comments. Thanks then for watching this video on Hasbro's first Zord Ascension project release. Definitely like the video if it was useful for you. I haven't watched anyone else's review yet because I didn't want to pick up on their biases in making mine, but I definitely will now, so can't wait to see what others are saying about this guy. Like I've said throughout, it's not perfect, but when is Dino Megazord ever perfect? That's how they get us to buy another. So maybe next time, hey? Until then though, if you need a version of Megazord, Zord Ascension Project is definitely worthy of your time. Even if in hand it might not feel like it at first. Stick with it, find things to love about it, and most importantly for me, get subscribed and come back for when we discuss ZAP Dragonzord. I've been Ryan and thank you for being here. See ya.